We call this meeting to order. This is the City Council Ad Hoc Committee meeting, 20 Backus Avenue, beginning at 7 p.m. on Thursday, February 18th, here in Caucus Room 3 on the 3rd floor City Hall. President or myself, Jack Knapp, Chairman, Councilman Mary Teitschultz and Councilman Paul Vitello. Also present is Corporation Counsel Les Pinter. I don't see Airport Administrator Paul yet. Director of Planning, Assistant Director of Planning. Is that what we call you these days?
Yeah, deputy.
Sharon, deputy, okay. Sharon Calitro. We have the Assistant Finance Director, unless you're the Deputy Finance Director.
Just to keep everybody.
Dan Garrick. We also have ex officio members, Councilman Ben Chianese, Councilman Dwayne Perkins, and Councilman Phil Curran. We have William Biddle, also known as Wing, here as the petitioner, and his representation, Neil Marcus, Esquire. Okay. Knowing what the purpose of the meeting is, this is, as we know, last month we met and approved the 2 base leases for this property. This is for the 3rd piece that was mentioned during the course of the last meeting. There are several issues at hand. I have here, and I'm not going to read them into record because they're quite lengthy, but I have here the original letter from Les to us, from Corporation Counsel to the committee regarding the purpose and the lease. I've got the planning report, which just came, planning commission report, which just came out to most of us today, which has quite a bit of information in there regarding issues that we're going to call on Sharon to explain to us. And I have somewheres a report. Here it is, the report requesting from the FAA. I believe this is probably from Paul Estefan. No, it's from Les, to the FAA regarding what their position would be on this lease. So those are the documentation on file. Paul Estefan has just arrived. Which one do you want? Okay, Les, if I could call on you first just to bring us up to speed as to where we're at, how we've gotten here.
How much time do you have, Mr. Chairman?
No, I already got a year and a half in, so.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, just to try to summarize it as rapidly as possible, the committee has met as a committee on the base leases and on these issues a number of times. And then, as you said, Mr. Chairman, the committee reported back to the Common Council, I think in January, with a recommendation on the 2 base leases, together with consideration to be given for what we call the adjunct parking lease on the side property, grass strip to the left of the strip. If you look at it, the council, the city council, asked that that adjunct lease be returned to it after review, consideration by committee as well as by planning and others. So that's why it finds its way to the committee. Now, this adjunct parking lease is part of a larger package of submittals to city officials for consideration of the development and of the outfitting of the basically two restaurants, a Chuck E. Cheese facility and another one. And so the adjunct parking lease that's before you tonight is the 3rd and final piece of the puzzle, such that UB Danbury maintains the full parking availability for the full build-out of both of these facilities. What has happened since the council referred this to this committee is that our office has worked with council for UB as well as others to try to refine the documents. We've also been in touch with the Federal Aviation Administration. That's the correspondence you have there. We are working with them on their final reviews of the leases. And what the committee is here for tonight is to review the adjunct lease, consider it for recommendation to the public hearing and the committee of the whole, together with the receipt of the planning department and commission's review, to to make sure that it conforms to all of their requirements. So, bottom line, you're here to consider the petitioner's request to execute a lease with Danbury for the third adjunct lease, making sure that all these conditions are satisfied before you recommend it forward. Just as a side note, Monday night, this is one of 5 items, at least at this point, Monday night is one of 5 items on the schedule for the council for public hearing, committee of the whole, just so the committee is aware of that. And one of the reasons for that is that there's some time deadlines that UB has. And so there was an effort to try to, if you will, fast track in a reasonable way to try to get the council to hear everything. So that's a quick summary.
Okay, and Sharon, if I could ask you, we just got today the planning report. Obviously, there's a lot of negative issues regarding the property in the planning report. I don't know how long ago when you got a copy of it, but we need to address those issues. I don't know how we could possibly put a recommendation forward to a Tuesday night meeting or Monday night meeting with that many issues on board with planning. But if you could just go through
Sure.
the major ones and take your nice corporate report and make it in layman's terms so we can.
Sure, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna open a couple of maps, so everybody knows that, again, the planning commission, as you indicated, the planning commission considered this referral last night at its meeting. So I did the same presentation that I'm gonna give to you. It was a referral from council, city council to the planning commission pursuant to 8-24 because it involves the lease of city-owned property, airport land and city-owned property. It is the portion of the parcel it's not a separate parcel, it's a portion of the airport. I don't know if you're familiar with the site in general. As Les had indicated, there were 2 previous leases that have now been executed. Those are shown in blue and in yellow, adjacent to the main UB site. The area that this lease pertains to is to the east of the side, what's referred to as the side parking area. And again, UB desires to lease a portion of that property from the city. I do think it's important, just so that you're aware, the parking that's proposed for that area is not required, is not necessary to meet the zoning requirements for the uses that they have proposed on this site, inclusive of the Chuck E. Cheese at the full seating capacity, as well as a new restaurant to go into the former Fortunoff space. So with those 2 executed leases already done and the configuration of the parking area on their site, they meet, pursuant to our zoning regulations, all the parking that's necessary.
If I may, we've been hearing for quite a while that in order to build out that restaurant as much as they want to, they're actually going to need more of those parking spaces. That's what we've been told for months now.
To the best of my knowledge, and based on the plan that's in our office under review by the various city departments today, the build out of the former Fortunoff space for Buffalo Wild Wings, it's on the plan, the full development of Chuck E. Cheese at the seating capacity desired, as well as Sleepy's, the GameStop, and the Cold Stone Creamery, all of that parking is met in these 3 areas. So that kind of is driving a lot of this review, because this is not parking that's necessary. This would be considered like any other permitted use in the CG20 zone, which is what this airport property is, a parking area. A parking area isn't allowed use in the CG20 zone. That's required. Again, it's not required to meet their needs. Now, they might have some future needs that we don't know about, but they have a plan in the department for review now, and they've met all of them. So what we did was, we went through the basic, the lease document that was sent to us in draft form. And we noted the comments as they relate to the land use approval process, not the terms of the payments or anything associated there too. So I can walk you through them if you want to. There's 6 or 7 paragraphs. Again, in section 1.01, there's basic lease provisions, which indicate that there's, it's the area to be leased is described by meets and bounds or a site plan, neither of which anyone has seen. So, at the minimum, we don't even know, I mean, they might know internally, but no one at the city knows whether or not a parking area in some portion of this even meets the dimensional requirements for a parking area. Aisle width, space size, things like that. So those would be things that we thought that would be necessary, a meets and bounds description and a proposed layout. So we can see that they're leasing enough land to get a parking area that meets the zoning requirements. That was our first comment. Number 2, section 4.01, the lease term. We had suggested some language changes to these provisions because there's some confusion about what the process is for the approval of this permitted use on this site. So what we did was we highlighted what we thought should come out, and we underlined some proposed language, which is pretty basic and pretty standard in our opinion. And that follows the way things are approved under statutes and administratively through the departments. So what we took out is the language regarding a conditional P&Z approval, because really we don't have anything that's called a conditional P&Z approval. We have an approval, a denial, or an approval with modifications or conditions. There's no conditional P&Z approval. So in order for it to follow statutes, we suggested some changes. So we took out those few sentences and added in that the tenant would be responsible for obtaining all municipal land use approvals required to use a demised premises, which is what this area would be called, for the permitted use, which is the parking area. No different than anybody else, any other applicant proposing to do something. Tenant shall provide a copy of the executed ground lease agreement to the planning commission with the application for the site plan approval as evidence of tenant's control of and access to the demised premises. Again, right now, there's no indication that the tenant, or UB, the applicant, has any right to submit an application to do any improvements on land they don't have any control over. So no different than when Neil, for instance, submits a zone change application, gets all the property owners involved to give him a letter saying they know what he's doing and he's authorized to represent them. It's really no different. Now, the approval for this parking area is considered a special exception pursuant to the zoning regulations. And why is that? That's because the approval of these 2 leased areas already done, that was done by special exception. This area is going to be physically connected to these parking area, to this leased area, the side leased area. You're adding more than 20 parking spaces, so it trips a threshold in the zoning regulations, which requires consideration of that plan to go back to the planning commission.
Of zoning,
Well, I
to
guess.
get a special exception to only planning, not zoning?
Well, it's the Department of Planning, not the zoning
Not
commission.
the
Yes,
zoning
no,
commission.
not the zoning commission. Again, it's kind of a separate
Internal, okay,
yeah.
yeah.
It doesn't get any kind of formal zoning commission approval because it's a permitted use in that zone. The site plan for the special exception, it's not a new special exception because they have a special exception for parking. It's a revision to the site plan. Again, no different than any other applicant. If the city, again, I'm going back to language, if the city of Danbury Planning Commission approves the application with modifications or conditions, the effective date of lease shall be the date upon which the modifications are approved or conditions satisfied. Again, no different than any other site plan that's approved with conditions in the city or anywhere else that legally isn't really an approved site plan until the conditions have been met. And then we had suggested if you wanted, at the end of the day, the lease would have a proposed site plan in it. You could swap out the site plan that actually gets endorsed by the planning commission chair once that's done. We did not, in the bold in that paragraph, we didn't really have any comment on the issues associated with the FAA. That's better left for lesson and Paul. Okay. And that covers basically the approvals section, how this would be processed. what the applicant would need to provide to us in order to process the application, and then they'd be treated kind of like everybody else. Section 5.01, the tenant improvements. There's some language in that paragraph which allows the tenant, which is UB, to make improvements to that parking area. Well, if anybody else in the city wants to make improvements on a site plan that's approved by the commission or the department, it needs to go back to the commission or the department. So we're just saying that you know, it's not a process that's afforded anyone else. So if they want to make any changes to a plan that eventually gets approved by the commission, it either has to go back to the commission if it trips a threshold, or it goes through a department review. So again, I think there's probably some language changes to that paragraph that would satisfy the commission were you to choose to do that. Again, same thing in the next one in section 7.01. There's some language in there that gives the tenant the option to install a fence whenever they want along the boundary line. Well, no one else can install, can again make site improvements without seeking permission from the department or the commission or the appropriate municipal agency. Number 5, section 11.01, the landlord's consent required. There's language in there that allows the tenant UV to use the parking area for things other than a parking area. And our comment was, if you're leasing it as a parking area and it gets approved as a parking area, you should use it as a parking area. Or they need to come back. Section 11.02, number 6, property transfers. There was some concern relative to an assignment or a sublet of the lease in its entirety to a tenant of UB. In other words, if it's a successor in interest or a wholly owned subsidiary of UB, they sell the property, that's who the lease should be with, not with Cold Stone Creamery or Chuck E. Cheese. The city should be leasing to the property owner, not a tenant. If they choose to assign or give all that parking that they get approved only to Buffalo Wild Wings, that's totally an internal business plan and business decision. We don't have any. Our recommendation is that we shouldn't have anything to do with that. That's their decision. Number 7, section 12.01B, effect of the taking. It's a little bit complicated, so bear with me. I'll try to be as clear as I can. Because the parking area is a permitted use in the zone and not necessary to meet the requirements for the uses on the site that they're now proposing. Should a taking occur, they wouldn't be non-compliant as it relates to the required number of parking spaces, because that has to be considered kind of on its own. It's just a parking area. It may be non-compliant if, for instance, a taking would reduce the aisle width from required 24 to 18. Okay, that might be non-compliant. But it doesn't mean that this site is non-compliant. Why? Because this site meets all the parking right here. When in the future a tenant change occurs, or should a change occur, like everyone else, many applicants, I should say, not like everyone, but most applicants come in and ask for a waiver to site plan approval. What does that mean? They don't have to go through the whole process. They just have to prove that there's sufficient parking on the site, or they can get it elsewhere to meet the requirements. So you can swap out retail for retail, restaurant, sometimes restaurant for retail, depends if that's what's allowed in the zone. So we had some concerns that this lease would declare this separate parking area out of compliance with the then applicable parking requirements. It's not, because it's not associated, it's not needed to meet the parking requirements. And then number 8 on section 14.4 in the authorizing motion, it was just confusion, I guess, on our part, and why there would be a reference to these two leases if this is a standalone lease on its own site associated with its own approval process. So that's the gist, the long and the short of it. And the Planning Commission obviously had some concerns as well last night associated with the land use approval process and these issues. And recommendation.
And I didn't see anything regarding any EIC issues. That all gets handled.
They would just, if the tenant is responsible to obtain all those municipal regulatory approvals, they'll have to figure it out. I mean, we'll figure it out with them, but, I mean, it would be their responsibility, whether it's a floodplain or permit, an EIC permit, whether they need something else from the airport, whether they need a curb cut. You know, we don't know because we don't have a site plan.
Right, you mentioned that in the
Yeah.
presentation.
Wayne, before I ask you a couple of questions, I'm gonna go to Paul, more or less, regarding the FAA. Where are we? I know I've heard issues, that there's issues with the leases because of the appraisals that were done. Is there any fact to that? I don't have any documentation on that, but I did hear that we were having problems with the FAA. Is that a fact? Paul? No?
We're in discussion with the FAA, but I
Okay.
don't think we have a problem with the FAA.
Okay.
The FAA wants to know that the revenue generated by this lease will go back to airport purposes.
Okay.
That's all they care about. And so that's in essence what we're trying to work with them to assure them of that. And they're asking questions like, you know, how is it gonna happen? Certain lease language that assures them of this, or at least, not lease language, but that the rent is sufficient, which apparently it's sufficient. But they wanna make sure that whatever that rent is, including the taxes, will go back to airport purposes.
In other words, I gotta show it on my revenue package when I submit it to the mayor at budget time. In other words, UB lease X amount of dollars. That's what they wanna see.
Paul?
Yeah, I have a quick question about this. A lot of information, we just got this today, but one thing did jump out of me in year number 6, which is Article 11, Section 11.02, permitted transfers, and read that a few minutes ago. I have the actual lease in question, and I don't see anything in this permitted transfer that indicates the city would allow them to transfer to a subleaser in the first place. I'm not quite sure what your objection was, and maybe you could point that out. It seems to me like what the permitted transfer would allow them to do is allow Wing to transfer it to a successor corporation, but not a tenant. I just didn't see anything in there that said that they could assign this to anybody who they felt like it.
Okay, it's in, again,
Yes, please.
okay, it's the last provision in that paragraph.
Okay.
It says and/or, so they can, to any person, I'll go back up to the top, they can assign, the
Oh,
assignment is made to
the
a.
shopping center,
Right.
leasing 5,000 square
Right.
feet or more, yeah, okay, all right, there it is. Thanks.
Okay. Wayne, the Glarian's been reporting that the parking is sufficient for what you're looking to do. Where are we at?
Okay.
Let's start with that one.
Let me first just introduce Stefan Rapalia, who
Hi,
came
sorry
late.
I'm late.
Stefan
I
works
wandered the
with
halls
me.
here a little bit, trying to
He's our
find my
in-house
way in.
counsel, he's been working with Les, and so.
Hi, Les.
Okay, just point of clarification. We understand that this plan, which you have, shows 248 seats for the Fortunoff space for a future restaurant. But the issue is that Chuck E. Cheese will not lease the space unless we can provide them 365.
Buffalo Wild Wings.
Buffalo Wild
Buffalo Wild
Did I say
Wings.
Chuck E. Cheese? Okay. Buffalo Wild Wings. So it's not a zoning issue that we can't lease that for a restaurant. It's a business tenant reason, and that's why we need this additional lease to satisfy their higher parking requirement for greater number of seats for a facility of that size. That's the issue. They will not sign a lease with us unless we can provide that kind of parking for them. In terms of the missing site plan and legal description, we have a site plan prepared, but we were under the impression that we could not submit that site plan until we have approval of these leases yet. I passed around a small version of the site plan which shows the 40 some odd space parking area here, prepared by Paul Fagan, the surveyor. He has mapped it out to work for a parking lot in terms of dimensions and drive widths and sizes, and he's laid it out to be a paved parking lot, which is what we understand the planning department recommends that be paved. We were hoping it'd be gravel, but, so he's laid it out that way. And in terms of a legal description, we're fully prepared to create that legal description to go along with this. All the other changes, which Sharon has outlined in her letter, are acceptable to us. We attempted to, we made changes to the lease. We submitted them to Les 20 minutes ago, so the poor guy has not had a chance to look at it yet. But it's fair to say that I think everything that Sharon has pointed out is perfectly fine with us, and we're prepared to make the changes in the lease to satisfy her comments. The last point, I think, Sharon's last point about the effect of the taking, we just were, in the lease, we were trying to make sure that it was understood that if there was a taking in the future, that we would not be required to, dispossess a tenant or something, that we would be a legally non-conforming use, taking up. But it sounds like maybe we wouldn't be, because we're not in violation of zoning, as you're pointing out. So that's sort of a moot point as far as,
Okay, how many parking spaces are we talking?
Please, 40.
Anyway, before we go to that, do you have any questions?
No.
Does anybody have any questions?
I think we brought this up several times with the reps from the 6th Ward, Councilman Genesi and myself, are pretty insistent on getting a permeable surface on that. Parking lot, just to bring everybody up to speed, we've got flooding issues in that area, and to seal up one of the last sponges at the airport with macadam is just not going to work for us. So we would implore the planning commission, the planning and zoning department, to allow an exception to some sort of permeable concrete, if you have to have a hard, and I know they make permeable concrete, to allow that in this particular section, in order to get the support of the 6th Ward, because they're at Jensen's every time it rains, thing goes up and it floods. So, Sharon, is that a possibility?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Yeah, I had a long conversation with Paul Fagan, who represents UB, on various alternative services. I expressed our concern relative to developing a site for a parking area with gravel, and there's no long-term, even short-term, one winter way to figure out where the parking spaces are, how do you delineate one spot from another, how big the spaces become. If there's no lines on it, there's nothing. And to which he agreed. There are alternatives to asphalt. And so this is the first time I heard it's a paved, because Paul and I spoke about various alternatives and would we consider them. I said, yes, we would consider them. You have to bring it in when you bring in the site plan. But those are our concerns. There's no way to keep it organized and maintain safety and ease of traffic flow around. If the stones are being, plowed and picked up in the plow and the spaces disappear, nobody knows where they are. That's the.
So,
that's
go ahead.
Follow, is the applicant, Wing, are you on board with that? A non-gravel but permeable surface? It would be more expensive, clearly, but.
It would double the cost to us of the construction. I'm not aware of what type of system we're talking about. I've not seen it. I'm leery of it. Is it like a pavers that have spaces in between them?
Yeah, there's
With grass that comes up?
There's I'm not an engineer, so
Actually,
I can,
a
but it's,
system,
yeah,
though.
it's,
They have a
they're
portal.
concrete blocks and
Yeah.
it's semi-permeable. You'd have to talk to them about it.
Okay.
Other than just paving stones, I mean, I think we're not talking about that. There are other things that can
Yeah,
cover
I'm not-
larger area.
I'm not referring
Yeah,
to
not
paving
blocks.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we
Cost a
weren't,
fortune to do that.
right.
Okay.
They'd be very nice.
So we are.
We saw a lot of wings, but.
we're- If that's what you all would like, that's what we will do. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Cheney.
Thank you. To the chair, my concern here with this piece is without a site plan to look at, it's hard to me, traffic flow is a big concern. As you know, with Chuck E. Cheese, which is a very successful establishment, and with the Buffalo Wild Wings is another very successful establishment, it's going to bring a lot of traffic to the area, which is going to be very successful. Giving the small amount of parking area in here relative to across the street with the other plaza is, traffic to get in and out of this would be very difficult. With 45 additional parking spots, makes it even more difficult. The current traffic light that's there is inadequate to handle the current traffic. It can barely handle Olive Garden and Red Lobster now. It just can't do it. Now you're adding two other very successful establishments. It's going to increase the issue, as you'll see, on its own. Without identifying that now, to go forward with this approval, it's going to be very difficult. So a site plan at least has to be at least identified to what those potential conditions will be for us to go forward, whether or not, what are we achieving here? We may achieve an increase in revenue, but on the other hand, we're going to create a traffic issue to other residents who don't go to Chuck E. Cheese or Buffalo Wild Wings, just want to go through to the post office. So I think all those issues still need to be addressed. I know it's more of a planning issue than here, but I think it all has to be worked together. You just can't do one without looking at the other. And that's my concern with the whole thing. I agree, Buffalo Wild Wings be very successful, but we still have to address the traffic issues. And that's going to be my issue going forward.
Question for you, Les. This, or Sharon, this would have to go, since it already got the negative planning commission approval. I'm just trying to think of our public hearing on Monday night. We're gonna meet to make a decision on an issue, whether it's this Monday night or another Monday night. One of the things was report, it wasn't a positive, was it a positive report from planning that we asked for, or just a report from planning?
Just ask for an 824 report, for their review and report.
But you need a 2/3 vote from the council to overcome a negative
Right.
planning commission report.
Right.
Unanimous, too.
So with that, I mean, I'm just, there seems to be several lingering issues here that I think we need to shore up prior to the public hearing, which is gonna be currently scheduled this Monday, unless we don't move on this tonight. How, with your time frame, I mean, I have to worry more about the open ends than I do your time frame, with all due respect. Can we get those issues closed between now and Monday night, so that when we meet as a committee of the whole, we can make an educated decision, as Mr. Chianese is looking for, with everything that he's asked?
Jack, if I can, on behalf of Wing Middle, for the record, Neil Marcus, and I'm doing this for two reasons. I have an 8 o'clock hearing in Brookfield, so it'll be my only comment. But the 824.
I wish you always had me.
The 824 referral is something that you were familiar with as the chairman of the zoning commission. It's like an 838 referral. And as Mary says, it requires a supermajority, because I actually brought the statute with me. A proposal disapproved by the planning commission shall be adopted by the municipality by a 2/3 vote. So it's a supermajority, essentially. So you can continue to process this and address the planning commission's concerns. Ben Chenise is absolutely correct. That's what Sharon was saying. We have to go for a special exception, which requires us to do the whole traffic study and to address those issues. But you're right, it has to be done in planning. In the way, as Wing said earlier, the problem is that we can't get to the planning commission without having standing, which is to have a lease. So we're kind of between and betwixt. If you say no lease, then we never go to the planning commission. On the other hand, if we have a lease and we go to the planning commission and no parking lot is approved, then that would be a condition of the lease and we have nothing, because we're not gonna lease the property without parking. So it all ties in together. That's why when the planning commission, in its 838 negative referral, requested all these provisions, they make sense, because we have to go through it anyway. So we have, as I indicated, or as Wayne indicated, we've tried to adopt all of these at the last minute, because we just got this, in the lease that's before you today. And we will, so we'll address all of these conditions, because we have to. So what, procedurally, we would like this to go to, we'd like this committee's endorsement of this lease, subject to whatever conditions that were set forth in the planning report being adopted in the lease. That's easy. We'd like it to go to the public hearing to keep the process going, because until we know we have a lease, we can't get to the planning commission for the special exception. Since it requires a 2/3 vote at the council, what I would like you to do, if you see fit, is to have the hearing on Monday night. If the lease as amended tonight meets the planning commission's concerns, do a new referral back to the planning commission under 8-24 of the revised lease. And then the planning commission looks at the revised lease, they give you a new recommendation, and that actually determines the number of votes at the council. So that's the process I'd like to do, if it makes sense to everybody else. But I agree that with Ben, that ultimately, a lot of concerns are before the planning commission and how the site plan works, including Paul's concerns, the surface. And I was telling Wayne, I got a bunch of different ideas. I'm not an engineer either, but I listened to them for the last 35 years, and every once in a while some of their ideas actually do sink in. And there are a bunch of ways to treat this, is either impervious with recharge, gallery recharge. It's all a question of how it engineers out. By the way, you can delineate parking aisles with a concrete, almost like a sidewalk. So you have gravel in between various sidewalks. That delineates it. You plow over it and you see exactly where your concrete is. And you can even paint it if you want with yellow stripes. But there are all sorts of ways to do it. So my request to you this evening, if you see fit, is to follow the process that you've already set out in terms of timing and send it back for the second referral, if Les and you approve the modifications.
Paul?
Okay, through the chair to Les. That sounds like a great idea. Here's the thing, we were charged to approve or to recommend action on this lease. And now we're being asked to recommend action on another lease or a major modification. Is that modification gonna be so great that we actually have to have another ad hoc, send this negative to the council, come back with that, with the modified lease, have another ad hoc and do that? Or can we actually just send this right off to the, to Monday's meeting with modifications?
The public hearing Monday night is intended, is the statutory public hearing that's required when the city sells or leases open space. All right, so it doesn't have the tight parameters as a public hearing where we are promoting an ordinance or looking to enact an ordinance. In that case, if you make substantive changes, as you know, we always go back to the committee or back to the council, whatever, to make substantive changes, and you have another public hearing. In this case, if you want to proceed to the public hearing, even with these amendments, as you call it, you can do that because it's the concept that's being heard by the public and by the council. In other words, the concept that on this approximate space, there's proposed to be parking, we're proposing to lease approximately, so it doesn't have to be so exacting. It just needs to give notice to the public that for purposes, and there may be a legal description by Tuesday or Monday night anyway, but what the public needs to know by statute is, here is the space, largely the size of the space that's intended to be leased to this applicant. So you've got a little bit of flexibility in there, but if the council committee, or the council committee in this case, doesn't feel that there's sufficient definition to it, you certainly, it's within your discretion to hold off on that, come back to this committee, and then have the March council refer it out to another public hearing. That's within your discretion. But if you proceed to the public hearing on Monday with these changes and you approve something conditionally, that's not inappropriate. You can do that. We just have to kind of hustle to review everything, make sure everything's in place. And just in a few minutes here, I've looked at, and most of the stuff is okay, but I haven't reviewed it in such detail yet. So I hope that answers the question with respect to Monday.
Well, yeah, just to follow up, I appreciate the fact that we can go to public hearing on this in terms of our obligation to the state statute under the Towers Act. But that's not really my question. My question, can we fulfill the obligation under the council? The council asks us to approve or deny this lease, and we're denying it. I mean, we're denying it with, or approving it with such amazing modifications that we're essentially denying it. So that's my question. We're fulfilling our obligation, not under the state statute for land use, public land use, but under the council's charge.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I think that, yes, I think you are fulfilling your obligations, because the lease that you referred to this committee as well as to the planning commission, in most cases, it's not, there's no certainty that that's the final lease. In this case, it particularly was not intended to be the final lease, because at the council meeting in January, everybody will probably recall that the adjunct lease was really not very well defined. So what the council sent out was, here's the draft document. Typically, we know there's going to be negotiations, and there's two bites of the apple. One is the committee of the whole bite on Monday night, or whenever that night is, and then the March bite of the apple, where the council still has two sessions, two reserves options. So, no, I don't think you'd be doing anything improper, Paul, by considering this lease on Monday with the amendments.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner?
Through you, Stefan.
Thank you. Les has been put on the spot because, as Wing said, we just provided this redrafted amendment a few minutes before this meeting. But for the record, I just want to note that most of the changes, really all of the changes that have been requested and that we've attempted to make are not to significant business terms of this lease. So I wouldn't characterize these changes as substantial or amazing modifications to the document. They're rather minor, actually, in the scope of the document.
Okay.
6 of the 9 points are there because we didn't have standing to submit a site plan. It's all that the contingency is that this lease doesn't take effect until we have a approved site plan for it.
And if I may, please keep in mind, just to respond, that we haven't seen your changes. So I don't know if they're amazing or they're minor. We haven't seen them. And we have to approve something that we haven't seen.
Of course, I understand.
Yeah, that always puts us in a bit of a tight spot.
Absolutely.
Mr. Cheney.
Thank you. Through the chair. Just a point of information for myself. This property currently is the airport property, correct? The airport is in charge of maintaining this property currently.
Correct.
So it's really part of their inventory, so to speak.
So to speak, yes.
Going forward, since so it really is not open space, it's airport property.
Correct.
So why does it even have to go to a public hearing to begin with? Since it's not open space, the airport can really lease its own property because it doesn't now. The Aviation Commission leases property all the time to its tenants without coming through this council. So why are we even involved with this airport property? I mean, going forward, if this is approved, it'd be the airport's responsibility to maintain it, to renew it, not us, because it's their purview for all leases on that property.
To the chair, even though the airport has jurisdiction over this property, the city is the record owner, and as a result, it does fit within the definition of open space by statute. So, and in order to be conservative with respect to the statute that requires a public hearing, we wanted to make sure that we covered that, because if, for example, the leases went through, or the lease went through, and the other ones were renewals, but if this new lease went through without making an attempt to fit that statute, somebody could potentially challenge that. We didn't want to do that. So it's city property. Just want to make that clear. Even though the airport, the FAA has some jurisdiction over it, it's city property. It is open space property by definition. So that neatly fitted into the requirements of the statute, in our opinion.
I mean, just going forward, all leases on the airport would have to come before this council? Any new leases?
Not necessarily, no, not necessarily, because we're talking about open space land. A lot of leases at the airport through the chair, either don't involve much land or existing leases or renewals or what have you. So each one would have to be determined on its own merits. This one we determined that it's open space
Thank you.
in our legal opinion.
Okay. Anything else, Paul?
That's it.
All right,
I'm
just,
ready to make a motion if you guys are.
Well, I actually have a question.
go ahead.
Through the chair to Les. Because we don't have this lease in front of us, I have no idea that most of the things have been addressed, that we've seen in here. And is a traffic study also in there? And I'm a little confused because I can't see what's happening, I guess.
I think, and Sharon can correct me if I'm wrong, but the base leases, okay, the existing renewal leases, the traffic studies have been done on that from the previous approvals for this complex. For the adjunct property, I think Sharon mentioned before that the revision to the site plan will address that review
Okay.
at that time. Which was in order.
As well as EIC issues and any of the other departments
Right.
that are involved with it.
That's why the adjunct was sort of shipped apart from the base leases, because it's really a new application and new property.
So if we're to take tonight and vote a positive recommendation on this to the council, okay, pending review of the amendments that were made, we're well in order to do that. And also, would we want to put verbiage in there pertaining to all the different departments, meaning we would, but how many, do we put the FAA in there, or do we just put planning and zoning?
Well, you can put whatever conditions you want on the motion, if you make a recommendation. The motions I might, or the referrals I might recommend are the FAA, planning, zoning, and of course the public hearing requirement. Those are the three that have been tagging along, if you will, throughout the process.
Okay.
And again, just to address one more point, Mr. Chairman, that the committee's decision or comfort with recommending this for conditions is really yours. You know, you've got to assess the situation. As Mary said before, for folks who haven't seen the lease and certainly haven't seen the changes that are recommended here, it's kind of daunting because, you know, what are we doing and everything. But we have spent quite a bit of time on all three leases are basically identical, they're very, very similar. So we spent the time negotiating those leases. The elements that Sharon's department has suggested are very good elements. They should be put in the lease. They probably won't take long to review, and the lease could go forward with that conditional understanding. But again, it's within your discretion if you feel that you want it to come back to this committee before you make a recommendation forward to the public. That's your call.
And just to follow up on Councilman Patello's concern about the permeable surface, we can put that in here as another, or do we get that detail oriented with the lease? Or do we leave that to planning and?
You can put whatever conditions you want on that area.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know you want to say something.
Yeah, no,
that's why I'm
I'm
looking
saying, I
at
don't
you.
want to tie their hands with permeable surface.
Right.
What I want is, I don't want any additional runoff. And if they want to do that by metering, or they want to do that by a permeable surface, or they want to do it by some as yet unknown system, that's fine with me, as long as the net result is we don't have any additional runoff. So, you know, I mean, it's great if they want to use pourable permeable concrete, I'm satisfied. But if they can't do that, and they want to put the sidewalks into the gravel, that's okay too. Or if they want to put in basins and meter the stuff, that's fine also. I don't care. I mean, I just don't want, I want a net zero runoff. I want it to be as if they didn't touch that sink.
I know Sharon wants to speak on
Yeah.
this.
If I may, Madam Chair. The zoning regulations require the post-development flows be held to pre-development levels anyway. So we will be addressing that during the course of the site plan review. And again, there are regulations governing the surfaces, of parking areas. So I'd be hesitant to, with all due respect, say, again,
Right.
You can have your own condition, you can do what you see fit, but we do have regulations in place, and they pertain to everybody, and there's only regulations across the board, and this should meet it like everybody else.
Okay. Mr. Estefan.
Through the chair to whoever. The airport has spent a lot of money on drainage, in excess of $5 million. We have done a study on the airport. We continue to update our studies on drainage because of the streams surrounding the airport. We require not only of ourselves, but of developers off the airport areas to maintain zero impact. In other words, no more water. You're gonna have to hold water at your location because we have done our hydrology study and we have held more water. We've gone as far as reducing the width of the north-south runway from 150 feet to 100 feet of width, remove all the asphalt, remove all the subbase, and return it to its natural state to hold more water on the airport so it doesn't come downstream to West Street. So we're very cognizant of water. We haven't dug in that area yet. And when I say dug, I've dug just about the entire airport at one point or another. I don't know what I'm dealing with for subsurface. I would not want to see us tie our hands to an engineering nightmare. I would rather, as Sharon stated, allow our regulations to dictate what has to be done in that area, because we don't know. We haven't done any earthwork there. The only earthwork I've done is put in a box culvert, both across the street, across Backus Avenue and adjacent to this property. So I would just recommend to the committee that we allow our regulations and our engineers in-house as well as out-of-house to come up with the best design.
If the director wants dominion over this, that's fine with me. It sounds like your standards might even be higher than the city standards. So that's, you know, I mean, if you wanna take management of this, Paul, that's what you.
Trust me, I intend to take
Okay, good.
management of it. If you remember, that lot and the lot across the runway used to be the parking
Yeah,
for the
and
fairgrounds.
that was gravel.
And that was gravel. And if you remember, most of us that have lived here many decades, know that when we parked the cars in there and it rained for Fair Week, if you were in the back of the lot, there was a tow truck to pull you out, or your buddy would come with a chain and pull you out of there. Because it was filled, let's face it. So when they moved Backus Avenue over, and they took it from being a straightaway and pushed it over to the south, wow, the rest is history. Okay?
All right.
Okay. Well,
I'll make a motion. Okay, let's correct me if I'm wrong. A motion to approve the lease with the conditions set forth by the deputy planning director, the FAA, planning and zoning, and a public hearing as required by statute.
Okay.
Does that cover everything?
motion's been made.
Yeah, could you add the airport to that too?
FAA?
FAA.
Well, the actual
Oh,
airport?
sure, and the airport, airport administrator.
Yeah. Second with the airport
Okay.
administrator.
Motion made, seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to be clear that what we're really doing here is we're taking an unformed document and sending it to a public hearing, and we really expect you guys to work together on this and, you know, bang something together by Monday so that we can, you know, we don't look like idiots, so that we got something.
Just so you don't look that way, just to give you some comfort that after the public hearing Monday, the committee of the whole has options.
Right, no, I
If we see
understand that,
something
I
that-
understand, but we want to get, this is, look, I don't want to cast any aspersions, this is taking way too long. I mean, I'm a little embarrassed on our side that this is taking as long as it has, but we've got to, we have to nail this down, I mean, we've got to. So let's work on Friday, Saturday, whatever, if you need help, I'll help you, but let's get something together on Monday that we can at least get a handle on, and then we can go from there using the regular departmental procedures, but let's get something together.
Can you be here Sunday after church?
I'm here, I mean, I'm serious. I'll have an ad hoc, I will have an ad hoc, and I'm considering, if we could have an ad hoc Monday. We could have another ad hoc Monday at 5, which would give us enough time to notice. We could put a notice in tomorrow, we could come back here at 5 o'clock on Monday and meet beforehand and see if we're okay to roll into the public hearing at 7 o'clock. I'd be willing to do that. I don't know about these guys, but I would be. And we have enough time to notice it. I had this conversation with Gene last week. That's why we had the meeting tonight. We were going to have the meeting originally at 5 o'clock on Monday. I said, let's do it Thursday. If we screw something up, we still have time to have one more ad hoc before the public hearing, which I'm willing to do. So,
Okay, motion's made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to see if the applicant would submit to my office a copy of the proposed site plan or the progress report that he's given us so I can read it. I mean, my glasses are
We'll
not.
make sure you get that.
I can't see all the information in there.
Okay, motion's made, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, unanimous. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you.